Question 12 of the 21 questions is, what are my top 3 talents and why? If you're new here, this is just me reflecting again on my 21 questions that I asked at the end of every year. I wanted to do a mid-year check-in because so much has changed this year that I wanted to just check in to see if there was anything that needed updating or anything that needed a little bit more focus. And so this is one of the questions that's under the career section. And I ask myself these questions every year, again, because I want to level up and I want to be very intentional about creating my life. And so the mid-year check-in is because so much of my life has changed. And again, I want to make sure that I'm still on course with who I think I am, how I'm showing up in the world. Like, I love how Dr. Maya Angelou says that real success, real happiness, real anything is when your thoughts, words, and actions line up. And I think for a lot of us, like, our thoughts, words, and actions don't line up simply because we're not reflecting on what we're thinking. We're not reflecting on what we're doing. We're not reflecting on what we're saying. We're kind of just bumbling through life. And answering the 21 questions gives me an opportunity to reflect, like actually reflect, and then going back to review gives me an opportunity to observe, like, what were you thinking and have you been saying that, have you been doing that? So under the career section, and career is really important from an HR perspective. You guys know I have my master's in human resources, and when I think about work, I always think about how you spend 70% of your life, your waking adult life, 70% you spend at work. And most people don't enjoy the work that they do. And most people don't enjoy the work that they do because they go into work thinking more so about the job or the money that they're going to make versus the career that they can build so that they can earn money, so that they can make a living. And it's a subtle shift in the mindset, but it's really, really important. And I evaluate my talents because, and I think even if I wasn't entrepreneurial, I want to make sure that I'm always doing work that optimizes my talents. And I want to make sure that I'm always doing work that optimizes my talents, because again, if I'm going to be spending 70% of my life doing something so that I can earn this resource, so that I can have a life, I at least want to make sure that I'm doing something that I am exceptionally good at or I enjoy doing, aka my talents. So that said, the talents that I put down in December are reading, sales, and speaking, which I think is very interesting because that's a little bit different than the ones that I put down last year. And I also like to see how my talents change, or my perceptions of my talents change as I age. But it's interesting that I put reading down as one of my talents because I don't think I think I've always associated reading with it being a hobby or being an interest. And I think in 2023, I was able to recognize that it's actually a talent to be able to read the way that I read and how much I read. And I've done a couple of book clubs before where people have made mention of how I read and how I digest information. And I don't know, I just assumed everybody read like that. I just assumed that, like, if you're reading a book and there is a line that's italicized or a line that's bolded or bullet points, that you read that with the emphasis that is in the book as opposed to just typography. But apparently, no, that's not how people read in terms of reading to organize and digest. But like when I'm reading, yes, even if it's fiction, nonfiction, yes, I'm reading for the entertainment, but I'm also reading for the purposes of learning. But I'm also like digesting and adapting that information very quickly. Like, I synthesize probably 95% of what I read. And most people don't do that. Most people are not actually synthesizing the information that is coming in. And so when it then comes time for them to engage in conversation, or maybe perhaps for them to do their job, they're not able to recall what they read. Or even if it's not about recalling what they read for work or for some professional setting, the books that they're reading are not having as much of a transformative impact on them as like books have on me. And even as it relates to fiction, like, let me see if this book is here, right here. Even as it relates to fiction, this book right here, let me show you this book. This is a fiction book this is 3 fiction books by N.K. Jemisin, just bound into one. When I tell you, when I read this book, I don't know if you guys were around when I was like grieving and I was like going through it, because I was in so much pain grieving. Oh, it was the worst thing ever. And I was just like, I'm so sad. I don't know what to do. I'm so much pain. Blah, blah, blah. Just such horrible grief. I read this book, this fiction fantasy trilogy that on its face has nothing to do with grief. The battle that is in here is like between gods and humanity and, you know, whatever. But as I read this book, this is the book that helped me to heal my grief. And what's fascinating about that is that the reason this fiction book can help me to do that, even though on its face that's not the major theme of this book, is because when I'm reading, yes, I'm reading the story that the author is telling, but I'm also reading for all of the context that's in here. I'm also putting these things into the context of the life that I have lived, the world that this person has built. Like, I'm suspending my reality, I'm suspending the truths that I know to be able to be absorbed in this world to such a degree that when the people in this world are having a hard time and they are going through their grief moments, like, I am walking through it with them, but then it's also having a healing effect on me. And so when I say that reading is a talent for me, that's what I mean. I mean that when I read, I am actually having a full blown experience that is cathartic and healing and healthy for me on the personal side, but also the way that I'm synthesizing, capturing, and cataloging information so I can recall it later. When I'm on stage or when I'm selling or when I'm talking to someone, so much of what I'm doing is just coming from the stuff that I've read. Like so much of what I'm quoting is coming from the stuff that I read. But there are a lot of people when they read, it's like in one ear, out the other, or just entertainment. So it's just digested for the moment. Like, no, I am absorbing what is going on. And like this book will forever. I mean, this is still my favorite N.K. Jemisin book so far. I haven't read her whole catalog, or series, but this series was so healing for me. And even when I did the research on this healing, it talked about how she had wrote this after she lost her mom. Like, and I think it's interesting that even though this book is not about grief, she was writing it through her grief. And later, 1,000 years later, when I read it, it was something that helped me to be able to process and heal my grief because the theme is in there, and that's just like a beautiful thing. So that is one of my talents. Then what's another talent that I wrote down? Oh, sales. Sales is something that I've known this. I just haven't wanted to accept it because I think I used to think of sales as like sleazy or manipulative or being pushy or, you know, just different things like that. But at the end of the day, I have to realize that like I'm a natural salesperson, right? Like even when I'm not trying to sell, I still end up selling. And I think the best example of that is when I think about how many people have purchased the mason jars that I store my food in. Never, not once in all the times that I've done a grocery haul have I ever been like, these are the mason jars and you should go and get them. And these mason jars are good for you because blah, blah, blah. I've never, not once said anything about like, click the link in the bio and get these mason jars. But when people see me in person and they meet me on the street, they're like, oh my God, I got the mason jars. Or the amount of people, because I can look at the link to see how many people have clicked on the link, the amount of people during that season when it was up that clicked on the link to get those mason jars, flabbergasted. But what I realize is that the way that I talk about the things that I love and enjoy, it naturally has I wouldn't say when you think about sales, salesy tone, but it naturally has a salesy tone because I'm genuinely excited and enthusiastic about the thing that I'm talking about. So like maybe even the way that I talked about this book, maybe some of you all are like, oh, I should check out that book. And so even without knowing that I'm selling, there's this like energy and excitement and sales tone to it. And I think for a very long time, I rejected it because I just felt like, I think I was conditioned to believe that it was maybe manipulative and harmful because you think about the person who's selling somebody something that they don't want or need. And I finally have matured into a place of like, no, sales doesn't have to be manipulative or harmful, like especially if my intent is in the right place. So anytime I am trying to sell something, whether if it was my journal or if it was my coaching program or it was me on stage or if it was something else, making sure that my intent is clean is the thing that helps me to embrace this particular talent. And I think when I think about why I wrote this down in December is because on some level I knew that this year was going to be me needing to sell in a different way than I've sold in the past. And I think that is because when I think about the pie of my business and what makes up my revenue, the area in my business where I have to sell the least is around speaking, because so much of my speaking clients come from referrals or experience. I think as I was transitioning, what I originally intended to do was to publish my book and move more into the influencing space. That comes with a lot of sales. And so I think December me was pointing that out to give myself permission to go ahead and lean into it a little bit more. Obviously, things have changed and I haven't been able to show up on camera or finish my writing in such a way, but I just do think that that's interesting, that that's something to note. And I'll probably write that down again for this year, is that my top talent is sales, so that way I can focus on it in 2025. And then last but certainly not least, my top talent is speaking. And we see this reflected in me doing my YouTube videos. We see this reflected in me being on stage. I really am curious as to see how and if in any way that talent will shift as a result of me having another human being. Something that one of my dear friends told me is that, like, I always talk about my son in my speeches, which I don't think I was conscious of it. Like, I get it now because I can obviously look at the video and see that there are many stories about him. But they just talk about how, like, there's just I'm always talking about my son. And I'm really curious as to see how I will incorporate my daughter and my husband in my speaking. Like, I just think that's gonna be fascinating. like I've spent the last 20 years, and I can say 20 years because so many of my speeches really truly did begin at the early years of my son's life. I've spent the last 20 years with core stories. And when I say core stories, it's like this concept that I have in my speaker training program, and even in the speaking book that I'm writing, is that you have certain types of stories. So you have core stories, and so many of my core stories, the stories that make up the story of who I am, center around my son and the journey with him through life. And so many of the lessons and so many of the insights that I'm able to convey from the stage are foundationally rooted in that relationship that I have with my son. And it's just going to be fascinating to see how my core stories change as it relates to having a husband and having a daughter, and how that shapes the way that I speak. Even if I think about having a daughter and being a woman who gets out on stage, because the way that I got on stage for my son was different, because I'm like, I'm trying to overcome adversity. I'm trying to beat the statistic. I don't want him to suffer from, having a teen mom. I'm trying to build a business so that he can have a better life. Whereas my daughter, she's coming into my life when I have built a really good life for her, and well, for myself, and vicariously she'll be able to get to live through that. But with my son, like, I'm his model of society, right? Like, I'm not his model of self because I'm a woman, he's a man. With my daughter, I'm her model of self, and her father is the model of society. But it'll be interesting to see that now that I'm in the role of modeling a self for my daughter, how will, if any way, will that change how I am on stage, right? Because modeling society for my son is different. There's different motivation. And I think about how even in when I was speaking before, I have my son and then I have my 7 nieces, and I was very highly motivated and driven by being a model of self for my nieces. I understand I'm not going to be their primary model because I'm not their mom, but that was in there. I'm really curious to see how that then shapes and shows up for my daughter, because I do understand that I'm modeling a self. I'm modeling womanhood. I'm modeling, femininity. I'm modeling, just all of those different things. And how, if anyway, will that affect my talent for speaking? Will I become bolder? Will I become, I don't know. I can't even, I'm trying to imagine it, but I can't I don't know how to imagine it just yet, but I am very fascinated by that. So that is question 12. I hope you take the time to reflect and think about your top talents and to think about whether or not you are exercising those talents in your work that you get to do every day. And I'll talk to you soon.